So today we're going to be making the Florida key lime pie. And key lime pie is one of the easiest pies to make. You don't have to fuss with a pie crust, and the only thing you really have to worry about is overcooking the pie. Now this is a small batch recipe for 2 individual key lime pies. If you wanted to make the entire pie, for most pie pans, doubling the recipe should do the job. And I'm going to be using these regular supermarket limes to make these, and obviously a true key lime pie is made from limes from the Florida Keys. But the further you get away from Florida, the harder it is to get those. And I live in Kansas City, which is quite a ways away, so these are going to have to do for today. I will go into lime selection a little bit later on in the video, but for now, let's get going with the recipe. Okay, to get started, place 2 ounces or 4 whole graham crackers into a food processor along with 1 ounce or 2 tablespoons of granulated sugar. Blend this mixture together until the crackers are fully broken down and there are no chunks left. Then we're going to work in 1 ounce of melted butter, and you'll notice a simple ratio given here of 2 parts cracker to 1 part sugar and 1 part melted butter. This is a good ratio to keep in your head for all crumb crusts in general. So blend the butter together until it's fully incorporated, and the mixture should resemble wet sand when it's all said and done. Okay, moving over to the stovetop, fold over a few parchment sheets like this and place them onto a sheet tray and set your ring molds on top of that. And I've got these cool adjustable ones you see here, but honestly you could probably find something cheap and totally usable at your local hardware store. So split the crust between the 2 molds, and it should be 2 ounces of crust for each one. And to tamp this stuff down, I like to wrap plastic wrap around my pan spray like you see here, and it works quite well as you can see. Clean up the edges a little bit, and these things are ready to go into a 300-degree oven for 15 minutes to set the crust. And baking unfilled pie shells like this to set the crust is known as blind baking. So while this is in the oven, let's get our filling ready. And for that, start with 1 can of sweetened condensed milk, and to that add 2 egg yolks and whisk all that together until everything is fully incorporated. And this is an important step because the next step is to add lime juice, and the sugar within the condensed milk protects the egg yolks from the acidity potentially curdling them. So speaking of lime juice, we need to gather 1/2 cup or 4 ounces, which should be anywhere from 4 to 6 regular limes or 10 to 12 key limes. Go ahead and snag the zest off one of the limes while you're at it for a little bit of added complexity, then combine everything together along with a tiny pinch of salt, whisk everything thoroughly, and once you're finished with that, we're ready to head back over to the oven to take the pie crust out. The step of blind baking ensures that the crust stays cohesive and doesn't crumble into a mess while you're eating the pie. So I'm going to spray the inside of the molds with non-stick spray. If you forget to do this, they won't come out of the molds later, so don't forget to do this part. Go ahead and divide the pie filling evenly into each of the molds, and once you're finished with that, load them back into the same 300-degree oven as earlier. And when it comes to custard pies like this one, lower temperatures are better because they provide a greater margin of error. Okay, we're going to check back on these in about 15 minutes, but for now let's learn a little bit about key limes and a few other types of limes you might come across when making key lime pies. Florida key limes are also known as Mexican limes, and sometimes you might find a bag at the store labeled as key limes that are actually from South America or Mexico. Now these limes are perfectly fine to use, but obviously they're not true key limes as they are not from the Florida Keys. Now key limes are described as slightly more acidic and yellowish in color, but all limes are green and turn yellow when ripe, so the yellowish color is more about ripening than it is about where they are from. Key limes were grown commercially in South Florida and the Florida Keys until 1926, when the Great Miami Hurricane wiped out virtually all the citrus groves down there. After this hurricane, most groves were replaced with the more common Persian lime, which are bigger, easier to grow, and more durable. Now they are still produced commercially, there's just not as many of them. You can find them down there in supermarkets, on street corners, and in farmers markets. This does also explain why they're more difficult to find the further you get away from that area. And if you can find them and you want to use them in the pie, go for it. Other than that, the Persian limes work just fine. I would, however, stay away from the bottled products, as the processing involved with this removes a lot of the fresh lime flavor. It's really not that much work squeezing out fresh lime juice, but if you do want to use the bottled stuff, I would get at least 1 regular lime. That way you can get the zest and the juice from it and have a little bit of fresh lime flavor. Now for the key lime pie itself, some sources say that the original recipe was made with a flaky crust as opposed to the graham cracker crust we know of today. And there are 2 origin stories behind this pie. One is that a person named Aunt Sally invented the pie while working at the Curry Mansion in Key West in the 1890s. And the other story is that the Borden Milk Company invented the pie in 1931 to sell more sweetened condensed milk. Now, both of these stories are rumors, but both of them make a little bit of sense if you actually think about it. With the first one, there weren't really cows in South Florida and there wasn't refrigeration at the time, so most dairy products did come out of cans, so this was a way to use that up with local produce. And with the second one, obviously companies are going to create recipes to help sell more of their product, and most cans of sweetened condensed milk do have a key lime pie recipe on the back of the can. Now obviously I don't know which one of these stories is true, and if you want to go down that rabbit hole, go for it, but for now, let's head back into the kitchen and check on these pies. Okay, now that we've got these out, we have to test them for doneness. And I'm gonna be honest about this, the toothpick test where you insert the toothpick to see if it comes out clean, that's a terrible way to test for doneness with these things. And the reason for that is the convection style heat of the oven cooks these things from the outside in, meaning that the outside portion of these things is hotter than the inside. And this heat will continue to transfer its way to the inside, and this is known as carryover cooking. And if you were to leave these things in long enough to be able to insert a toothpick into the center and have it come out cleanly, it would be long overcooked by then and have a grainy, curdled, scrambled egg texture, and that would not be a good thing. We want a smooth, creamy texture on these things. So the way that I prefer to test these things is to lightly tap the outside to see how sort of jiggly and cohesive it is. It is sort of an eyeball test that you have to do a couple of times, but it is the best way to do this. You could also stab a thermometer into it if you want to be on the safe side with this thing, and if that's what you want to do, 140, that's what you're going for. So after about 20 minutes, the pies have cooled down, so I'll place them into the refrigerator to cool the rest of the way. And I like to make a sauce for these things. So for that, combine 8 ounces of frozen mixed berries along with 1 to 2 ounces of sugar and cook that up until the berries thaw and soften up. They'll release their juices and combine with the sugar to make a syrupy consistency. And I'm going to blend this whole thing together with an immersion blender, and this is going to make what's called a coulis. If you were to leave the mixture chunky, it would be called a compote. So as always with an immersion blender, put plastic wrap around the pot and the wand to prevent from making a mess. Blend the mixture thoroughly enough to break apart all the seeds that are within it, and you should have a consistency that's thick enough to coat the back of a spoon. So let's set that aside and let's make some whipped cream. For the whipped cream, make sure the cream is cold, otherwise it won't whip up properly. And as far as ratios go, honestly, I usually eyeball it, and it's largely going to depend on your own taste preference and how sweet you like it. But more important than any of that is being able to whip it up properly to achieve the correct consistency. And when you're about halfway there, go ahead and add a few drops of vanilla extract. And adding liquid ingredients early on interferes with aerosol formation and only makes this task more tedious. So when you're done whipping it up, it should have stiff peaks, but it should also be smooth and not appear grainy or curdled in any way. And to make those cool fancy designs like they do in pastry kitchens and bake shops, grab a disposable pastry bag, cut the tip off, and place the desired metal tip into the end of the bag like you see here. Then all you do is fill the bag with whipped cream, squeeze it all down to the end, and twist up the open end of the pastry bag, which makes it easier to pipe out in the end. So let's set this aside for now and unmold one of our pies. You can see that the crust is set up pretty well, and the trick to get this thing out of the mold is to use a torch. And you don't want to go crazy here with this step, you just want to soften and loosen the outside. And be careful when grabbing the mold here because it could be very hot, and here we are at the moment of truth. Let's see how this turns out. And how about that? It came off cleanly, and honestly it should every time. So let's get this thing onto a plate and put the whole thing together. Start by centering the pie onto the plate, spoon some of the sauce around the pie, and you could use a squeeze bottle for this part, but I like the rustic imperfections of the spoon. Clean up all the plate blemishes, then pipe the whipped cream on top of the pie, and to finish the whole thing off, garnish it with a bit of lime zest on top. And with that, we've reached the end of the video, so thanks for tuning in and see you next time.